world sounds different at 3 in the morning. Smaller. You can hear the hum of the refrigerator from 2 rooms away, the sigh of the house settling. It's a sacred kind of quiet, the kind you earn after a long day, a long life, the kind of quiet that lets you sleep. And then you hear it. It starts as a low grumble, a distant threat, like thunder on a clear night. But it's not thunder, it's him. The sound swells, tearing through the stillness, a jagged, angry roar ripping the fabric of the dark. It's the sound of a Harley-Davidson with its lungs torn out, a mechanical scream of pure, selfish noise. It rattles the glass in our bedroom window. My wife Sarah stirs beside me, a soft moon of protest in her sleep. The sound gets louder, a physical presence, as he thunders past our house, shaking the very bones of the foundation. Then, just as quickly, it fades down the street, leaving behind a ringing in my ears and a poison in the air. He was just a kid, really, maybe half my age, with a chip on his shoulder the size of Texas. He thought that noise was the sound of power, of freedom. He didn't know it yet, but tonight, that sound was the starting pistol for a war he was about to lose, and he'd never even see my face.
The first time I saw the bike, it was parked in the driveway 4 houses down. It was a monument to bad taste. Too much chrome, a paint job that looked like a spilled can of neon orange magma, and pipes wide enough to shove a potato into. It belonged to the new guy who'd moved into the old Henderson place, a rental. We learned his name was Zane. He had that slicked back hair and a strut that told you he thought he was the main character in everybody's story. I remember thinking, well, there goes the neighborhood. But I'm not the kind of guy who borrows trouble. I've lived in this town, on this very street, for 35 years. Sarah and I raised our 2 kids in this house. It's a quiet place, or it was. A street of mostly retired folks, young families, people who wave when you drive by, who bring your trash cans in if you forget. We value things like peace and quiet here. It's the currency of a good life. My life is built around quiet. I'm a furniture maker. Semi-retired now, but my workshop is still my sanctuary. It's in the garage, a place filled with the smell of cedar and sawdust and shellac. Every tool has its place. My chisels are lined up by size. My hand planes sit on a felt-lined shelf. It's a world of precision, of patience. You can't rush good work. You can't force a piece of cherry to bend to your will. You have to understand it, work with it. You shave off a little at a time, checking the fit, feeling the grain. It's a slow, deliberate conversation between man and wood. That's the rhythm of my life, or it was, until Zane and his rolling earthquake arrived. The first time it happened, we thought it was a one-off, some celebration maybe. It was 1:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. The bike roared to life, idled for an eternity like a dragon clearing its throat, and then screamed off into the night. An hour later, it screamed its way back. Sarah and I were wide awake. "My goodness," she'd said, pulling the covers tighter. "What on earth was that?" I said, my jaw tight. "The new neighbor, just a guy making sure everyone knows he's home." But it wasn't a one-off. It became a pattern. Every few weeks, like some kind of profane ritual, Zane would fire up that monster in the dead of night. Sometimes it was 2 a.m., sometimes 4 a.m. There was no rhyme or reason to it. He'd be gone for an hour, maybe 2, then come roaring back. The sound was obscene. In the daytime, it would have been just another loud motorcycle. But at night, in the absolute stillness of our suburban world, it was an assault. It felt personal. It was a statement that his whims were more important than the sleep of 100 other people. It was the sonic equivalent of a middle finger aimed at the whole street. I'd lie there in the dark, my heart pounding, listening to the engine fade. I'd imagine what he was doing. Late-night poker games, a shady deal, visiting a girlfriend he shouldn't have. It didn't matter. What mattered was the disrespect. It was a profound violation of the unspoken contract we all signed when we choose to live together in a community. You don't blast your music, you don't let your dog bark all night, and you sure as hell don't start up a straight-piped Harley when the rest of the world is asleep. Sarah started getting bags under her eyes. She'd be jumpy, waking at the slightest sound, thinking it was him. "Just wish he'd stop, George," she'd say over breakfast, her voice tired. "It feels like we can't even rest in our own home anymore." That's what got to me. It wasn't just my peace he was stealing, it was hers. After a couple of months of this, I decided I had to do the neighborly thing, the civil thing. I walked down to his place one Saturday afternoon. He was out in the driveway, polishing a chrome fender with a greasy rag, some loud rock music blaring from a portable speaker. "Hey there," I said, walking up the driveway. He looked me up and down, a little smirk on his face. "Can I help you, old-timer?" Old-timer. That's how he saw me. A relic, a piece of the scenery. "I'm George Miller, from a few houses down," I said, keeping my voice even. "I wanted to talk to you about the bike." "She's a beauty, ain't she?" he said, puffing out his chest. "Custom job, one of a kind." "It's certainly loud," I said, "and that's kind of the issue. When you take it out late at night, it wakes up the entire street." His smirk vanished. His eyes went flat and hard. So, I said, taken aback by the bluntness, "I was hoping you could maybe keep it to daylight hours, or at least, walk it to the end of the street before you start it up." He laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Are you serious? Walk it? You know how much this thing weighs? Look, Pops, it's a free country. I pay my rent. I can come and go as I please. If you don't like it, buy some earplugs." He turned his back on me and cranked up his music. The conversation officially over. I stood there for a moment, feeling the heat rise in my collar. The sheer arrogance of it was stunning. There was no room for discussion, no concept of common decency. There was only his world and his desires. I walked back home defeated. Plan A had failed. Plan B was Dave. Dave Rollins was a cop who lived right across the street from Zane. A good guy, I thought. We'd coached Little League together years ago when our sons were young. I caught him while he was mowing his lawn the next day. "Hey, Dave, got a minute?" I laid it all out for him. The late-night rides, the noise, my conversation with Zane. He listened, nodding, his face etched with a familiar weariness I'd seen on a lot of cops. "I hear you, George, I really do. My wife's been complaining about it too," he admitted. "But honestly, my hands are tied." "What do you mean? There are noise ordinances, aren't there?" "Sure there are," he said, shutting off the mower. "But for me to do anything, I've got to catch him in the act. By the time someone calls it in and a patrol car gets here, he's gone. And for me to act on it myself, it's tricky." "Tricky how? You live right there." He sighed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Look, George, the guy's a professional pain in the ass. I know his type. If I go over there and throw my weight around, he'll file a harassment complaint against me in a heartbeat. He'll claim I'm targeting him because he's my neighbor. It becomes a whole internal affairs thing. It's a mountain of paperwork and a headache I don't need. Unless he's breaking a major law right in front of me, my best bet is to just keep my head down." He looked genuinely sorry. "Best I can tell you is to keep a log. Dates, times, call the non-emergency line every time it happens. If they get enough complaints, maybe they'll send a patrol car to sit on the street one night." So, that's what I did. For months. I kept a little notebook by the bed. October 14th, 2:17 a.m. October 30th, 3:40 a.m. November 12th,
1:05 a.m. I'd call the line. I'd sit on hold, report the disturbance to a bored-sounding dispatcher, and then lie awake till the bastard came home. Nothing ever came of it. No patrol car ever appeared. The helplessness was the worst part. It felt like the system, the very idea of community, was broken. This one guy could hold an entire neighborhood hostage to his ego, and there was nothing anyone could do. The anger inside me started to curdle from a hot rage into something cold, hard, and patient. I'd lie awake and think about my workshop, about solving problems, about how when a piece of wood refuses to cooperate, you don't yell at it. You find the right tool. You apply pressure in the right place.
Breaking point came on a cold night in January. Sarah had the flu. She was weak, shivering, and needed every bit of rest she could get. I'd finally gotten her to fall into a deep sleep around midnight. I was sitting in the living room, reading, just to make sure she was okay. The house was dead quiet. I felt a sense of peace, of being her protector. Then it started. The low, familiar rumble. My blood ran cold. Not tonight. Please, not tonight. But of course, it was tonight. The roar grew, and I saw the headlight beam slice across our front window. The house vibrated. In the bedroom, I heard Sarah cry out, a startled, feverish sound. I snapped. Something inside me just broke. It wasn't loud. It was a quiet, clean break. All the frustration, the helplessness, the conversations with Zane and Dave, that all fell away. And what was left was clarity. A cold, sharp, diamond-hard clarity. The rules didn't work. The system was useless. Civility had been met with contempt. Fine. I walked out to my garage, the sound of the Harley already fading down the street. I flicked on the single overhead bulb. The familiar smell of pine and machine oil filled my lungs. I looked at my tools, my saws, my drills, my sanders. They were instruments of creation. But any tool can be used for more than one purpose. A hammer can build a house, or it can tear one down. My eyes fell on a small, heavy cardboard box on a high shelf. It was left over from a roofing job I'd done on the shed a few years back. The label was faded, but I knew what was inside. 1.5-inch galvanized steel roofing nails, wide, flat heads, viciously sharp points designed to punch through asphalt shingles and stick. I took the box down. It felt heavy in my hands, solid. I opened it and looked at the nails, gleaming dully under the light. They weren't a weapon. They were a tool for solving a very specific problem. Zane thought he lived in a world without consequences. I was about to teach him that consequences are real. They just don't always come from a man in a uniform. Sometimes they come from a quiet man who's been pushed too far. I didn't feel rage anymore. I felt like a craftsman standing before a new project. I had the materials, I had a plan, and I had all the patience in the world. My plan wasn't about a single grand gesture. That's how a guy like Zane thinks, loud, flashy, and dumb. My approach had to be the opposite. Quiet, methodical, undeniable in its effect, but completely deniable in its origin. It was going to be a campaign of attrition, a slow, grinding lesson in cause and effect. I waited. For 2 weeks, the nights were quiet. I almost hoped he'd sold the bike or crashed in on one of his midnight joyrides, but I knew better. His ego wouldn't let him quit. Sure enough, on a Wednesday night, the familiar roar tore me from my sleep. 3:12 a.m. I wrote it down in my notebook, but this time, it wasn't a complaint. It was an invoice. He usually got back about an hour later. I waited until 4:30 a.m., long after I heard him return. The street was silent again, draped in that pre-dawn darkness where the shadows are deepest. I put on a dark jacket, a pair of thin leather gloves, and slipped out the back door. The air was cold and bit at my cheeks. I stayed in the shadows of the trimmed hedges and oak trees that lined our street, moving like a ghost. When I got to his house, the bike was sitting in the driveway, cooling in the dark, ticking softly. It looked arrogant even when it was sleeping. I didn't get close. I knew the path his tires took. He always backed it out in a slight curve before straightening up. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small handful of roofing nails, maybe 6 or 7. I didn't throw them. I walked to the edge of his lawn, and with a gentle underhand toss, I scattered them on the asphalt, right where his rear tire would roll. They disappeared into the darkness of the pavement, invisible. I walked home the same way I came, a shadow among shadows, and slipped back in the bed. Sarah never even knew I was gone. The next afternoon, I made an excuse to take a walk. As I passed Zane's house, I saw him. He was standing by his bike, hands on his hips, staring down at a very flat rear tire. He was kicking it and muttering curses under his breath. He looked angry, but mostly just annoyed, like he'd picked up a random nail on the road somewhere. Bad luck. He had it fixed by the weekend. I knew this because he took it out for a spin on Saturday afternoon, a short defiant roar around the block as if to prove he was unbeatable. 10 days later, it happened again. 2:45 a.m., the roar, the wait, the return. This time, when I went out into the cold dark, I was even more careful. He might be getting suspicious. I tossed another small handful of nails onto the driveway in a slightly different spot. The next day, I saw a tow truck in his driveway, a flatbed. Zane was arguing with the driver, jabbing a finger at his bike. Another flat. Now it wasn't just bad luck. Now that was a pattern. I could see the paranoia starting to creep into his posture. He kept looking up and down the street, his eyes scanning the houses, searching for an enemy he couldn't see. He was starting to understand that the world was not, in fact, all about him. Something out there in the quiet dark was pushing back. The final lesson came 3 weeks later. He'd been quiet for a while, and I started to think maybe he'd learned. But addiction to ego is a hard thing to kick. On a Monday night, the beast roared again. 1:20 a.m. He was gone for a long time. This was it, my final move. I didn't go out after he came home. I went out while he was gone. I knew he'd be back, and I knew he always pulled straight into his driveway, stopping just short of the garage door. This time I didn't just scatter a few nails. I took the rest of the box. I walked right up to the end of his driveway and created a small, dense minefield of galvanized steel, a 10 by 10 inch patch of guaranteed failure, right where his front tire would come to rest. Then, for good measure, I sprinkled a few more in the path of his rear tire. I went home and got into bed. When he came back an hour later, the sound was different. He came down the street full throttle, but as he turned into his driveway, there was a sudden, sharp pop, followed by a hiss that I could almost hear from my bedroom. Then another, softer pop, 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 as his rear tire found its own rewards. The engine coughed and died. Silence. The most beautiful, perfect silence I had ever heard. The next morning was glorious. I didn't have to walk by. The evidence was on full display. The Harley was sitting crooked in the driveway, leaning awkwardly, both tires pancake flat. Zane was nowhere to be seen. The bike sat there all day, a monument to his defeat. It sat there the next day, too. It was like a beached whale, stripped of its power and menace, looking pathetic and slightly ridiculous. On the third day, the tow truck came back. This time, Zane wasn't arguing. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching him winch his crippled machine onto the flatbed. He looked smaller. The swagger was gone, replaced by a sullen, simmering frustration. He still didn't know who did it. Was it the old guy who talked to him? The cop across the street? The young family with the baby? It could have been anyone. It was everyone. He had declared war on the whole street, and the street, in its own silent way, had won. A week later, a for sale sign appeared in his yard. Not for the house, for the bike. It was handwritten on a piece of cardboard leaning against the garage door. The price was crossed out and rewritten lower twice. He was having trouble selling it. I guess a bike known for mysterious, recurrent flat tires isn't a hot commodity. Eventually, the bike disappeared. I don't know if he sold it or just hauled it off to a junkyard. It didn't matter. It was gone. The quiet returned. The nights were once again sacred. Sarah started sleeping through the night. The bags under her eyes faded. The tension I didn't even realize I was carrying in my shoulders finally unknotted. One Saturday, I saw Zane out in his yard packing boxes into a U-Haul trailer. His rental lease was up. He saw me watching from my porch. Our eyes met across the street. There was no recognition in his gaze, just a kind of dull, defeated anger at the world. He looked away first, heaving another box into the trailer with a grunt. He didn't have the energy for a confrontation anymore. The fight had gone out of him. He'd been beaten by an enemy he could never identify, and that was the most demoralizing defeat of all. A few weeks after he moved out, I was sitting on my front porch in the early evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, a much prettier orange than his bike. The air was cool and clean. The only sounds were the chirp of crickets and the distant laughter of kids playing down the street. Sarah came out with 2 glasses of iced tea and sat down next to me. "It's so peaceful now," she said, leaning her head on my shoulder. "It is," I said, and I meant it. I never told her what I did, or Dave, or anyone. It wasn't something to be proud of, not really. It was just necessary. A chore, like fixing a leaky faucet or playing in a warped board. You identify the problem, you select the right tool, and you apply it until the problem is solved. I thought about Zane. I don't think he was an evil man. It was just the man who had never been taught the simple physics of community. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. He thought his freedom meant he could do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. He never understood that real freedom, the kind that lasts, is a contract. It's a balance. My right to swing my fist ends where your nose begins. My right to make noise ends where my neighbor's peace begins. He only understood the language of force and consequence, so I spoke to him in a language he could understand. Not with fists or angry words, but with something colder and more effective, with logic, with little bits of sharpened steel laid out in the dark. I didn't want to hurt him. I just wanted to hurt his bike. I wanted to break the machine, not the man. Because the machine was the source of his power, the amplifier for his disrespect. And once it was broken, he was just another guy who couldn't pay his social dues. Some people you can reason with. Others you can't. For them, the only lesson that sticks is the one that costs them something. Time, money, pride. I just handed him the bill, and he paid it. In installments.
Like and subscribe.